A boy returns from death, his soul touched by the divine. He carries a message from Jesus for the Pope, a revelation that could change the fate of the world. As he walks through a world on the brink of destruction, his presence ignites a battle between good and evil that no one can escape. With the faith of millions resting on his shoulders, can he deliver the message that will save humanity? The clock is ticking, and the world is watching. The question remains, will the Pope, the spiritual leader of the faithful, heed the warning before it's too late? It was an ordinary morning in the small town of Aricia, Italy. The streets buzzed with the sound of life as the residents went about their daily routines. But for Matteo Lombardi, 13 years old, everything had changed. 3 days ago, he had been struck by a car while crossing the road. His body was lifeless. He was dead. But now, he was standing in his bedroom, looking at his own reflection in the mirror. His heart raced, but not because of fear. It was something deeper, something more divine. He had come back to life, and he could feel the presence of something greater surrounding him, something ancient, powerful, and all-knowing. The message he had was not his own, but from someone far beyond the living world. He heard the voice of Jesus in his mind, calling to him, "Go to the Pope, tell him what you have seen. Warn him of the coming darkness." Matteo, with no idea how or why he was chosen, knew that the task before him was far greater than anything he had ever imagined. His life was not his own anymore. He was an instrument for the divine, and the message he carried could save or condemn the world. In the Vatican, Pope Benedict XVI sat in the quiet of his private chambers, contemplating the state of the world. He had seen the signs, the wars, the disease, the suffering. The Church had always faced trials, but these felt different. There was a darkness rising, one that seemed to be sweeping the globe, and he feared it was just the beginning. Suddenly, his prayer was interrupted by a knock at the door. A cardinal entered, looking flustered. "Your Holiness, there's a boy outside. He claims to have a message from God." Pope Benedict raised an eyebrow. "A boy? What message?" The cardinal hesitated.
"He says it's for you. He says his name is Matteo Lombardi, and he's been dead."
The Pope's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors of miraculous resurrections before, but he had never thought he would face such a moment himself. Could this be true? Could this boy really be a messenger from God? Without another word, he stood, and they made their way to the boy. When Pope Benedict met Matteo, he was struck by the calm in the boy's eyes. Matteo did not seem like someone who had just returned from the dead. He appeared as though he had seen something far beyond what any human could comprehend. "Your Holiness," Matteo said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet urgency. "I have a message for you from Jesus Christ. He has sent me to warn you of the darkness that is approaching. The forces of evil are gathering, and the time to act is now." The Pope listened intently as the boy shared what he had experienced in the moments after his death, visions of a world consumed by war, hatred, and sin, with shadows creeping across the globe. Matteo described the rise of a new leader, a man who would bring about a reign of terror. This man would claim to be a savior, but in reality, he would be the embodiment of evil. And, Matteo added, only faith in Jesus Christ could stop the coming darkness. "Pope Benedict," Matteo said with grave certainty, "this message is not just for you, but for all of humanity. You must prepare. You must lead them into the light before the forces of darkness overtake us all." The Pope was shaken to his core. He had always known that evil would rise again, but this was different. This wasn't just a war of nations or ideologies. It was a battle for the very soul of mankind. News of Matteo's resurrection and message spread like wildfire. The media hailed it as a miracle, while skeptics questioned every detail. But for those who truly believed, a sense of dread settled over the world. People began to notice the signs, natural disasters, strange phenomena, and an undeniable increase in violence and hatred. As weeks passed, the Pope assembled a secret council of the world's top religious leaders. They discussed the troubling visions Matteo had shared, and it became clear that a new figure was emerging. He was charismatic, powerful, and seemed to possess a supernatural ability to sway crowds. His influence spread quickly, and his followers, growing by the millions, believed he was a new Messiah. But behind his words was a darkness, an undeniable evil that the Pope and his council could not ignore. This man, known only as Azrael, was a master of manipulation, promising peace and prosperity while secretly preparing for global domination. He spoke of unity, but his true agenda was destruction. The Pope knew that this was the final trial, the greatest test of faith the world would ever face. The Pope issued a call to action. "We must stand united against the coming darkness," he declared. "Now is the time to pray, to fight with every ounce of strength we possess. Our faith will be our weapon." The world's religious leaders responded. Priests, pastors, rabbis, and imams all united in an unprecedented show of solidarity. They preached against the rising tide of evil, calling on people to reject Azrael and return to the teachings of Christ. But Azrael's influence was overwhelming. His words were seductive, his promises irresistible. People from every corner of the globe rallied to his cause, believing he was the true Messiah. His power grew, and soon it seemed there was no stopping him. The Pope, Matteo, and their allies launched a spiritual campaign to combat Azrael. Their weapon was prayer, the Word of God, and the unity of believers. But Azrael had a secret weapon of his own, a dark force that he wielded with terrifying skill. Are you feeling the weight of this battle between light and darkness? This story isn't just about what happens in the pages. It's about what happens in the world around us. The power of faith, the strength of unity, and the importance of standing together against the forces that seek to tear us apart. We need you to join this fight. Comment below with your thoughts on how we can fight against the darkness, and share your prayers for those who are lost. Don't forget to like and subscribe to continue reading this gripping journey and stand with us as we face what's to come. Your voice is needed. Together we can bring light to a dark world. As the days passed, the Vatican became a place of quiet desperation. The world seemed to be tipping into chaos as Azrael's influence grew ever stronger. Cities burned, nations fractured, and despair settled heavily on the hearts of people across the globe. Even the faithful, the ones who had once stood firm in their beliefs, began to doubt. Was the divine intervention everyone had hoped for ever going to come? The Pope spent countless hours in prayer, deep in communion with God, seeking a sign, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Matteo, now a symbol of faith and courage, sat beside him during those long, silent hours. The weight of the world was on their shoulders, but they knew they couldn't give up. If they did, it would be a victory for evil. One evening, as the Pope knelt in prayer in the inner sanctum of the Vatican, the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. The temperature dropped, and a brilliant light pierced through the thick darkness of the chapel, enveloping everything. Matteo's heart raced, and he felt an overwhelming sense of peace, as if the entire world was holding its breath. From the light emerged an angel, radiant and powerful, its wings stretching across the room, casting long shadows on the floor. The Pope and Matteo both fell to their knees in reverence. "Fear not," the angel spoke in a voice that resonated deep within their souls. "The time is near for the forces of light to triumph over darkness. I have been sent to deliver the will of God. You will be the vessels through which his message will spread." The angel extended its hand toward the Pope and Matteo, its eyes filled with divine authority. "There is still hope. Trust in the Lord, for his light will guide you, but you must unite his people. Your prayers and your faith will drive the darkness away." With those final words, the angel vanished, leaving only the brilliance of its divine presence lingering in the air. The Pope rose to his feet, his heart filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "Matteo," the Pope said, his voice steady but full of conviction, "we must act now. The battle is not over. We have been chosen to lead." The Pope wasted no time. He called for a global gathering of religious leaders to come to the Vatican, asking them to stand in unity against the growing darkness. The world needed to witness a display of faith like no other. And so, from all corners of the earth, priests, bishops, pastors, imams, and rabbis all made their way to Rome. Matteo stood by the Pope's side as the religious leaders arrived, each one more apprehensive than the last. The Pope stood at the front, his presence unwavering, as the faithful assembled within the hallowed halls of the Vatican. The air was thick with anticipation, and there was an overwhelming sense of urgency that gripped everyone present. Time was running out, and the forces of evil were closing in. The Pope took the stage, addressing the crowd with power and humility. "Brothers and sisters in faith, today we stand united before the world, ready to combat the evil that threatens to consume us. We are not alone. Our strength lies in our unity, and with God's grace we will rise above the darkness." He paused, and the room fell silent. Matteo stepped forward, his voice trembling but filled with unwavering faith. "The message is clear. We are to stand firm in our beliefs. We must embrace the teachings of Christ, for only through him can we overcome this evil." The Pope raised his hand to signal the beginning of the Holy Prayer, and the gathered leaders joined in unison. They prayed for protection, for guidance, and for the strength to face the dark times ahead. The sound of their voices filled the air, a harmonious chorus of hope and faith. As they prayed, something extraordinary happened. A strange sensation swept over the room, and a wind picked up, rattling the windows. The light within the Vatican seemed to grow brighter, almost as if the heavens themselves were watching over them. It was a divine confirmation God was with them. While the forces of light gathered in Rome, Azrael was not idle. His influence continued to spread, turning cities into battlegrounds, with his followers causing mayhem and destruction. His army of zealots marched in the streets, their eyes glazed with fanaticism. The world was rapidly becoming a place of darkness, and Azrael knew that if the Pope and his followers were allowed to unite, his hold on the world would crumble. Azrael, a man of charisma and power, stood in his secret lair, surrounded by his most trusted lieutenants. He laughed darkly as he watched the scene unfold on his screens, the faithful gathering in the Vatican like lambs to the slaughter. "The time has come," Azrael muttered, his voice cold and calculating. "The world will bow to me. This so-called faith will only bring them destruction. I will show them the power of true control, of true dominance." Azrael's followers, equipped with weapons and dark magic, launched a series of attacks on the religious gathering in Rome. They struck swiftly, targeting key leaders and sowing fear among the faithful. The streets of the Vatican became chaotic as gunfire erupted and explosions rocked the buildings. But the Pope and Matteo were undeterred. They rallied the faithful, urging them to stand strong in the face of this assault. The Vatican became a fortress, and the religious leaders led the charge in prayer and defense. Despite the overwhelming odds, the light of faith seemed to grow even stronger. The Pope's faith was a beacon of hope in the midst of chaos. As the Vatican was under siege, Matteo received another divine message. "The time for passive resistance has passed," the voice of God spoke within his heart. "It is time to engage the enemy directly. You must go to Azrael." Matteo shared the message with the Pope, who nodded in agreement. The final confrontation was at hand. The Pope knew that this battle would decide the fate of humanity. If they did not act, the darkness would consume everything. The Pope, Matteo, and a small group of faithful warriors ventured into the heart of the city, prepared for the inevitable clash with Azrael and his army. It was a battle of epic proportions, good versus evil, faith versus darkness. The very soul of humanity was at stake. As they approached Azrael's stronghold, the earth trembled beneath their feet. The sky grew darker, and the air became thick with a sense of foreboding. Azrael stood at the gates of his lair, surrounded by his followers, ready for the ultimate confrontation. "You think you can defeat me with mere prayers and faith?" Azrael sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You are fools. The world belongs to me now." The Pope raised his hand, and the faithful began to chant, their voices reverberating with power. Matteo stepped forward, his heart filled with the love of Christ, and he cried out, "In the name of Jesus Christ, we stand against you, Azrael." A storm of light erupted from their prayers, clashing against the darkness that Azrael had summoned. The battle between good and evil had begun in earnest, and only one side would emerge victorious. The clash of faith and darkness raged for hours, each side determined to claim the victory. In the end, it was the strength of the Pope's unwavering belief that tipped the scales. Azrael, his power finally broken, fell to his knees, defeated. As the days turned into weeks, the Vatican slowly began to return to normal. But the scars of the battle were deeply ingrained in the hearts and minds of the faithful. The streets of Rome were now lined with candles, each one representing a prayer, a life lost, or a moment of grace. The world had narrowly avoided total destruction, but the cost was great. Many innocent lives were lost in the struggle, and it was clear that the world would never be the same again. Matteo, having once returned from death, now stood beside the Pope, his purpose clearer than ever. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but the war was not yet over. The forces of darkness may have been defeated, but evil was an ever-present force in the world. They had won the battle, but they needed to continue their vigilance to ensure that the light of Christ would never fade. The Pope stood at the pulpit of St. Peter's Basilica, his eyes filled with sorrow for those who had perished. "Brothers and sisters, we stand here today not as victors, but as survivors. We have witnessed the might of evil, and we have seen the strength of our faith. But let us not forget that the battle was won only through God's grace and through the unity of his people." The faithful gathered, their hearts still heavy with grief. But there was a lightness in the air, a renewal of spirit that had not been felt in years. The Pope continued, his voice steady and strong. "The Lord has delivered us from the darkness, but now it is our task to rebuild, to heal, to ensure that this moment of grace is not forgotten. Our faith will be the foundation upon which the world is rebuilt." Matteo stood at the front, his heart swelling with pride as the people of Rome stood united, not just as believers, but as a family, bound together in Christ's love. They had endured the darkest of trials, and now they would be stronger than ever before. The rebuilding of the Vatican was only the beginning. The message that had been delivered from the heavens through Matteo's return from the dead was only part of a much greater plan. The Pope, with Matteo by his side, traveled to every corner of the world to spread the divine message. They were met with warm welcomes, but also with resistance. The forces of darkness, though defeated, were still at work in the hearts of men. In every city they visited, the faithful gathered, eager for the message of hope and renewal. The Pope spoke of God's infinite love and how through Christ all things were possible. He reminded the people that their faith, once tested, was now stronger than ever before. Matteo, for his part, became a living testament to the power of God's grace. His story of dying, returning, and delivering a message of salvation was a beacon of hope to those who had lost everything. His words were filled with passion and conviction, and he moved the hearts of those who listened to him. He spoke of love, sacrifice, and redemption, telling people that they too could rise from their darkest moments just as he had. The world began to change. Nations that had once been divided by war and hatred began to reconcile. Even the most hardened souls began to turn to God. The message of peace and love spread like wildfire, and people everywhere started to rebuild their communities, their homes, and their hearts. But not everyone was ready to embrace the change. Azrael, though defeated, had left behind a network of followers, dark souls who would stop at nothing to see the world fall into chaos once more. The Pope knew that while the war against evil had been won, the battle for the souls of men was ongoing. As the world embraced the new era of faith, the remnants of Azrael's followers quietly regrouped. In hidden corners of the world, they whispered of rebellion, of a return to power. These disciples of darkness had been scattered, but their resolve remained strong. They believed that humanity was weak and that their hearts were easily swayed by faith and hope. The only way to stop the rise of light, they believed, was to plunge the world back into darkness. These new leaders, masked in shadow, began to carry out their plans in secret. They planted seeds of doubt among the faithful, infiltrating governments, churches, and organizations with their twisted ideology. Slowly, they built their influence, gaining followers who were hungry for power, revenge, and domination. They worked in the shadows, unseen by the public, but their presence was growing stronger. The Pope and Matteo were aware of this growing threat, but the faith of the people was stronger than ever. They had seen the light of God shine through the darkness, and they knew that as long as they stood united, the forces of evil could never win. Matteo, ever vigilant, worked tirelessly alongside the Pope to root out these dark forces. Together, they traveled to regions of the world where evil had begun to fester, seeking to dismantle the networks of rebellion that threatened to undo everything they had fought for. They exposed the lies of those who sought to turn hearts away from the Lord, shining a light in places where darkness had taken hold. The Pope knew that the world was at a crossroads. The forces of light were strong, but the forces of darkness were cunning. The battle for the souls of humanity was not over, and the enemy was ever present, even in the most unexpected places. It was on a dark night in Rome when the true extent of the threat became clear. Matteo was walking along the ancient streets deep in thought when he felt it. An overwhelming sense of foreboding, a presence that he couldn't quite explain. It was as if the very air around him had changed. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, and a chill settled in the air. Suddenly, a figure appeared before him, cloaked in darkness. Matteo froze, his heart racing. The figure stepped forward, revealing its face, a face that was twisted in an expression of pure hatred. "I have been waiting for you, Matteo," the figure hissed. "You think you have won? That the light of God can vanquish me? You are mistaken." Matteo took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for the cross at his neck. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure laughed, a sound that sent shivers down Matteo's spine. "I am the one who has been watching, waiting. I was there when you died. I was there when you returned. You think you are special, but you are merely a pawn in a much larger game." Matteo's blood ran cold as the figure's words hit him like a hammer. The darkness was not gone. It had only retreated for a time, biding its moment to strike. "God's light will always prevail," Matteo said, his voice steady despite the fear rising within him. "You will never win." The figure smirked. "We shall see." With a sudden, violent motion, the figure disappeared into the shadows, leaving Matteo alone, trembling. He knew in that moment that the battle was far from over. The forces of darkness would stop at nothing to reclaim the world, and only the unwavering faith of the Pope and the faithful would keep the light shining. Are you captivated by the ongoing battle between light and darkness? Want to see how Matteo and the Pope continue their fight for humanity's soul? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated as we move forward into the heart-pounding action of this epic story. The fate of the world is in their hands. Stay tuned for what happens next. The days following Matteo's encounter with the mysterious figure in the streets of Rome were filled with an eerie tension. The Pope knew that the battle was far from over, and the dark forces were no longer lurking in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. They were actively working against everything that had been built in the aftermath of the great conflict. Matteo found himself restless, plagued by the ominous encounter. The figure's words had left an indelible mark on his soul. The devil's deception was more cunning than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about defeating evil once, it was a constant struggle for the hearts and minds of humanity. The enemy had learned from its previous mistakes, adapting to the changing tides of war. They had failed once, but they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. Word spread throughout the Vatican that a new movement was stirring among the faithful, one that called itself the rebirth of the fallen. They claimed to follow the teachings of God but twisted them into something dark, something malevolent. At first, they appeared to be harmless, people speaking of spiritual awakening and enlightenment. But the Pope and Matteo knew better. This movement wasn't about salvation, it was about control. They must be stopped, Matteo said to the Pope in a private meeting. They are gathering followers who are too blind to see the truth. This new ideology is poison, and it is spreading rapidly. The Pope nodded solemnly, his hands clasped in prayer. We must be vigilant. The enemy never rests, and neither can we. And so, their work began once again. The Vatican became the center of an effort to expose and dismantle this twisted ideology. But the task would not be easy. For the first time since the battle against Azrael, Matteo felt a weight on his heart. This enemy was more insidious, more patient. It wouldn't be defeated by mere strength of will. While the Pope worked tirelessly to battle the spread of the false movement, Matteo ventured into the heart of the rebellion, determined to infiltrate their ranks and expose the lie. He traveled to hidden places, to the underbelly of cities where the darkness had taken root. He spoke with former followers of Azrael who had escaped the chaos of the previous conflict. Many of them had been brainwashed into believing that their cause was just, that they were fighting for the true faith of a new world order. Matteo knew that this was more than just misguided people. It was a well-orchestrated effort to sow discord and despair. And at the heart of it all was the elusive leader, the mastermind who had been pulling the strings since the beginning. He had seen this before, darkness feeding on human weakness. But this time, it was different. The leader of this movement wasn't a demon from hell. It was someone much closer to home. It wasn't until Matteo tracked down one of the leaders in the rebel movement, a man who had once been a high-ranking member of the Vatican, that the truth was revealed. The man was an old friend, a former priest who had once stood beside Matteo, preaching the word of God. But now, his eyes were empty, cold. He spoke of a new world, a world where God's teachings were twisted into a weapon for control. It is not enough to fight evil, Matteo, the man said, his voice rasping. We must become evil. We must shape this world into something stronger than the meek faith of the masses. Matteo recoiled in horror. You're lost, he said, shaking his head. This is not the way of Christ. You have turned your back on the truth. But the man only laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Christ has failed us, Matteo. The old ways no longer serve. A new age is upon us, one that will bend the world to our will. The days that followed were filled with mounting tension. Matteo and the Pope worked in secret as the movement's influence continued to grow. Followers were flocking to the cause, their eyes blinded by false promises of power and salvation. What had once been a movement of hope was now a movement of fear, and those who stood in opposition were labeled as enemies. As Matteo and the Pope prepared for their final stand against the forces of darkness, a new threat emerged, one far greater than anything they had yet encountered. Azrael, the fallen angel, was not truly gone. He had been biding his time, watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. In the dead of night, a terrifying event unfolded. The world's most sacred temples and churches were destroyed in a series of simultaneous bombings. The destruction was unprecedented. The pillars of faith that had supported humanity for millennia had been shattered in an instant. The Pope, shaken by the horror, summoned Matteo to a secret meeting. This is it! The final battle is upon us! Matteo, filled with determination, knew that the war against evil had reached its crescendo. This wasn't just about saving the world, it was about saving every soul. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. As the final battle loomed, Matteo knew that this war was not just a physical one, it was a battle for the very soul of humanity. With Azrael's return and the rebellion growing stronger, there was no turning back. The world had been torn apart, but it was through this destruction that the final test of faith would be laid bare. The Pope, alongside Matteo and other faith leaders, called upon every nation to unite against the darkness. It was time for the faithful to rise, to stand together as one body in Christ. The armies of light would stand shoulder to shoulder, praying for divine intervention, for strength to overcome the enemy's deceit. Azrael's followers, led by the fallen priest who had once been Matteo's closest confidante, were now preparing for war. They had created a city of darkness, a fortress built on the ruins of the world's most sacred places. Within this fortress, Azrael was said to have taken physical form once again, ready to wage his final war on humanity. The final battle was fierce, The armies of light clashed with the legions of darkness in an earth-shattering conflict. Matteo fought alongside the Pope, his heart filled with righteousness, knowing that the fate of the world rested in their hands. Every swing of his sword, every prayer he whispered, was a cry for God's mercy. Azrael, now fully manifested, stood atop the ruined cathedral, his eyes glowing with malice. "This is the end, Matteo," he sneered. "The world will bow to me." But Matteo, fueled by the power of God, answered with a roar. "Not while I stand. Not while I fight for his name." The final battle raged on for hours, but in the end, it was Christ's light that prevailed. Azrael's dark form was shattered, his power crushed by the unyielding strength of faith. The aftermath of the final battle left the world scarred, but not broken. Though the cities lay in ruins, the spirit of humanity was not shattered. What remained of the once vibrant nation stood as monuments to the power of belief, courage, and unity. Each stone, each tower rebuilt with the hands of those who had survived the darkness. In the aftermath of Azrael's defeat, a sense of peace settled over the world. It wasn't the peace of a world untouched by chaos, but one that had learned from its deepest wounds. People had fought not just for their survival, but for their souls, united under the banner of light, refusing to fall prey to the lies of darkness. Matteo stood before the shattered remnants of the cathedral, his heart heavy with the weight of the world's trials. The sky above was a tapestry of crimson and gold, a fiery symbol of the eternal struggle between light and darkness. As the sun set, the horizon glowed with a promise, God's promise, that even in the darkest hours, hope could be found. For many, this victory was the beginning of a new era, a world not ruled by fear, but by the grace of God. But for Matteo, the journey was far from over. He knew that while this battle had ended, others would come. The devil would never cease in his attempts to lead mankind astray, but with the strength of faith and the unwavering hand of God, they would always rise to face him. As he walked among the survivors, Matteo saw the faces of those who had once been lost, now finding their way back. People who had been swept up by Azrael's false promises were now learning the true meaning of salvation. They were not defeated, but redeemed, each person a testament to the power of God's mercy. The Pope, standing beside Matteo, looked out over the ruins, his heart a mixture of sorrow and hope. "We have been tested, Matteo," the Pope said softly, his voice filled with both grief and joy. "But through our trials we have grown stronger. God's work is never done, but his love will always guide us." Matteo nodded. "We fought for his name, for his truth, and we have emerged victorious. But I know, the battle will always continue." The Pope placed his hand on Matteo's shoulder, his eyes filled with compassion. "Yes, but as long as we stand together, as long as we hold on to his word, we will be unshakable. Evil will always try to rise again, but we are the light that will pierce through the darkness." With the Pope's words echoing in his heart, Matteo turned to face the survivors, families, soldiers, priests, and those who had once been lost to the lies. They were the new church, the new foundation of faith that would rebuild the world. They would carry the lessons of the past with them, ensuring that no man, no woman, no child would ever be led astray again. As Matteo walked among them, he noticed the small acts of kindness, the comforting touch of a mother holding her child, the prayer whispered by a soldier as he knelt in gratitude, the smile of an elderly priest offering words of solace. These moments were the true rebuilding of humanity, not in the towers and temples, but in the hearts of those who had been touched by God's grace. But there were also those who had not made it through the trials, the fallen warriors, the priests who had died in battle, the innocent lives lost in the destruction. These would never be forgotten. A funeral was held in honor of the brave souls who had given everything for the fight against the darkness. The ceremony was somber, yet beautiful, a celebration of life in the face of death, a recognition of sacrifice and service to God. Matteo stood among the mourners, his eyes fixed on the simple wooden crosses that marked the graves of those who had fallen. He prayed silently for each one, his heart heavy with the realization that the cost of this victory had been high. But as he looked to the sky, he felt the warmth of the rising sun on his face, and in that moment, he knew. The fallen had not died in vain. Their sacrifice had saved the world. Their souls were with God now, forever at peace. In the years that followed, the world slowly rebuilt itself. What had once been shattered was now being forged into something new. Governments, cities, and communities came together under a banner of unity. Guided by the lessons learned from the final battle, the faithful gathered in churches once again, not out of fear, but out of a desire to grow closer to God. They did not forget the past, but instead carried its lessons forward. They knew that darkness could rise again, but with God's guidance, they would always have the strength to overcome it. Matteo, now an elder among the faithful, had become a revered leader, his name known far and wide. His story was told to the children, his actions sung in hymns. He had fought for the world, for humanity, and for God's eternal kingdom. But as the years passed, he never stopped praying, never stopped working to strengthen the bonds of faith. He knew that as long as there was life, there would always be work to do. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Matteo knelt in prayer by the newly constructed altar in the heart of the rebuilt cathedral. He whispered a prayer of gratitude, thanking God for his guidance and strength. He prayed for those who were lost, for the souls still in danger of straying from the path of righteousness. And as he finished, he felt a deep peace settle within him, knowing that he had done all he could. He had fought the good fight. He had been the warrior for God, and now it was time for others to carry the torch forward. The world would never be perfect. There would always be battles to fight, always be darkness to confront. But as long as there were those who held on to the truth, those who believed in God's love, the light would never fade. With a final quiet prayer, Matteo rose to his feet and looked out over the rebuilt world, his heart full of hope, his faith unshaken. The dawn had come. This story is just the beginning. The battle between good and evil is never over. Now, it's your turn to join the fight. Share your thoughts, your prayers, and your stories in the comments below. Subscribe to stay updated on the next chapter of this eternal struggle. Together, we can face whatever darkness lies ahead, with faith as our shield and God as our guide.